Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. The government is looking up to China to give a fillip to India's economy, or so it seems. There are 67 references to Chinese in the three-year Action Agenda 2017 to 20 prepared by the government think tank Niti Aayog. The agenda released by Finance Minister Arun Jaitley on the 24th of August not only hails and acknowledges China's economic muscle, but also highlights how India comes up short. China may not be the friendliest neighbor, but it is the world's second biggest economy and has a lot going for it. From special economic zones to job creation, from world-class universities to modern cities, from communication technology to soft power, the Niti Aayog, which is chaired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has taken note of it all. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze Niti Aayog's three-year action agenda and see if it can replicate the Chinese model. Joining me on the program today are Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry; A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director, Business Standard; S.K. Jindal, Chairman, Investment and Capital Markets, ASSOCHAM. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Jindal, I'd like to begin with you. What do you think of the three-year agenda plan?
I find this very interesting. Since when I heard about this on 24th of August and I have read, I find this is really the thing which we need, because with China we have lot of similarities, population wise, need wise. Only thing is we need to follow the good things from there and we can have similar results here also. Chinese results known to everybody. In a 16 or 17 trillion foreign trade economy of the world, they have a share of 13%, 13.5%. We have 1.6%. So they are about 9 to 10 times higher than us. What needs to be done is just follow them in the right way. All good things we must absorb. They have tried and they have tested them. We can do the same thing. We can catch them up. So this makes good sense, and I was thinking about it for many years, why we cannot follow that policy. Other countries which have progressed well in the last 3 decades, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, for example, South Korea. But similarities are not the same as much as we have with China. So this Chinese model is definitely doable, and it is good time that we should start doing it now, follow their things and replicate the same thing in our country. It is very much doable.
Sure. Mr. Dua, is the agenda then the fillip that the Indian economy has been looking forward to, has been waiting for?
The fillip coming from the agenda which has just been released, is that the question?
Yes.
Probably yes, because it does talk about a whole lot of things which need to be done in the next 2.5 years. 6 months of this three-year agenda are over. It's suggested a lot many things, to the extent that the Finance Minister who released it on the 24th called it a textbook of reforms. That almost everything which is good for the all the homilies are there. I would have liked to see in this agenda one prioritization of what is to be done in the 3 years. Probably everything needs to be done in 15 years for sure. The vision, strategy would have taken actionable points out of it, how to go about it. I would have liked to see prioritization of what is urgently needed and what is doable in this part, this short period of 30 months or so left. In the economic agenda, I would have liked to see how to spur investments, looking at the issues of savings dwindling in the economy, as also the private sector investment. How do we handle that? It certainly talks about higher government expenditure, but at the same time, when it also says that you must by next year reach the target of 3% fiscal deficit, 0.9% of GDP as your current revenue deficit, etc. You can't put so much on the government to do as it has talked about. So catalyzing how private sector can be brought back was another thing which this could have been attended to. I would just say one other thing, that certainly the plan, what it's talking about on emphasizing social sectors, health, education, agriculture, rural development, all highly doable, highly desirable, but ways and means which needed to be spelt out, picking up some of the important things in each of these segments, which are a priority sector, and then telling which of those elements could be pushed during the next 2.5 years, probably has not come out.
Sure. Santosh Kumar Mehrotra, Professor of Economics, JNU, joins us on the debate right now as well. You know, Professor, do you believe that this particular Chinese model that we might adopt is the answer really as far as India is concerned? Because there is a lot that we can learn from China, several similarities, as Mr. Jindal has already pointed out. Is it the strategy going forward?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what Mr. Jindal was saying, but I presume that he was saying something about coastal economic zones. Am I right in believing that?
We can talk about the coastal economic zones as well. You know, following the coastal economic zone model that the Chinese have followed, do you think that is doable and workable in India?
I've understood. Yeah, I got it. Yes, it is doable and workable in India, but it will be much more difficult to implement, which is part of the reason why it has not been tried so far in 25 years since the economic reforms began. Because after all, if it was that easy to do in our country, then it would have been done. And in any case, as you know, that the special economic zones which have been adopted have not been terribly successful. So, well, I hope and pray that it works. But, you know, I think the Chinese model is much bigger and much smarter than coastal economic zones. So the first thing that the Indian policymaker needs to recognize, which I don't think has been recognized in 25 years, is that China has had, since its economic reforms began, an industrial policy. It has had an industrial strategy, which we did not have. We used to have an industrial policy or policies prior to the economic reforms, which were not very well designed in any case. But the point is that since 1991, manufacturing has not been a leading sector of the Indian economy. Manufacturing share of GDP and manufacturing share of employment has barely grown at all in the 25 years since the economy has experienced rapid economic growth. Therefore, it's absolutely critical that we understand the Chinese model in a bit bigger and a better way than simply thinking about it as coastal economic zones, which can be one of 5 or 6 components of a larger, broader industrial policy. The first, in other words, we have to recognize the fact that we have reduced tariffs since 1991 so sharply and so quickly that we almost faced deindustrialization in the 1990s, and in fact the Chinese and other countries' exports have completely swamped us. Point one. So this is part of point one about our industrial strategy. Point two, we have over the 2000s in particular signed a number of free trade agreements without necessarily the Ministry of Commerce talking to the Ministry of Finance. The result of that has been that we developed an inverted duty structure. In fact, FICCI in 2014 did a study of a whole series of sectors which came to the conclusion that a whole slew of manufacturing sectors were being impacted by an inverted duty structure. You may ask, what is an inverted duty structure? It means two things which adversely impact industrialization in India. One, you have relatively low rates of finished products, and so that finished products can be brought into the country, which means if there is a domestic manufacturer who is producing this, and if the foreign manufacturer has lower costs, then the domestic Indian manufacturer is going to get wiped out, which is precisely what happened. Secondly, the second dimension of inverted duty structure is that you have intermediate products and raw materials which go into manufacturing which have a high duty, a high import tariff.
Sure.
Now, obviously, this is the opposite of opposite of a duty structure, of a tariff structure, which a country should have, because intermediates and raw materials should have a low duty if you want to encourage domestic manufacture. So,
Sure. Professor, I'm sorry, but I'm going to cut
listen
you
to the
short because of
following
paucity of
situation.
time. We have to keep our answers brief. I'm going to bring in Mr. Bhattacharya into the picture now. You know, Mr. Bhattacharya, manufacturing has been spoken about. The government has been criticized severely in the past because of the manufacturing not doing too well. Do you believe that the agenda addresses the manufacturing problem as far as India is concerned? And also, Mr. Dua pointed out that the agenda should have prioritized certain sectors rather than being such a wide-based agenda itself. Do you believe that the right things have been addressed?
Yeah, important questions you have raised. I agree with what Mr. Dua said, that there is an absence of prioritization in the entire agenda. One wished that priority, what needs to be first and what should be the sequencing of reforms, as they say, could have been outlined, which is not there, which is the missing element in the entire document. Coming to the larger question of manufacturing, why manufacturing sector has got neglected in the last 25 years, and where our share in the entire GDP pie has actually come down, is for a variety of reasons. It is not just a question of inverted duty structure, but it is also a question of absence of factor market reforms, land market reforms, labor market reforms, and even till recently, the availability of credit on easy terms. All these factors, and plus, most importantly, is the exchange rate policy. Now, if you have a rupee which is unusually strong, at least 30% stronger than what it ought to be, going by the real effective exchange rate of the currencies with which we do our trading, naturally, our manufacturing sector will take a hit. Now, what does this action agenda paper do? In my view, it does point to many of the policy imperatives that this government must undertake. Number one, it talks about the need to move away from just pursuing a manufacturing sector as its main goalpost. In a sense, it says that while you pursue manufacturing, please remember that your area of strength is services. So therefore, it is not just manufacturing, but also services, in which you have financial services, tourism. It says cultural tourism.
Right.
So that is one area, and I think we will be failing in our assessment of this document if we don't mention what this document does on two areas, which is, maybe we can discuss it in the second round. Which is, one is it does point out the weaknesses in our job sector, which is where there's underemployment in this sector and the economy, and particularly in the agriculture sector, where it lays down an action plan for what needs to be done in agriculture. It even goes to the extent of recommending that the minimum support price system should be replaced by a price deficiency subsidy system. So I think on the agricultural side, where the overall goal is to double the farm income, this document provides a kind of a new impetus to some of the policy imperatives that needs to be undertaken. And I agree with Mr. Dua that it would have been better to have given a kind of a sequence of those actions, how they should be undertaken.
Indeed. Yes, Professor, you wanted to make a point. I can see you raising your hand there.
Yes. You see, jobs in manufacturing are not going to be growing unless we prioritize exports, point one, which this is, these coastal economic zones are planning to do. But even more importantly, as I think was mentioned earlier, that there are sectors which need packages. Leather needs a package, apparel and garments has got one, there is wood and furniture, there is food processing. These are the 4 or 5 sectors of manufacturing which are highly labor intensive. Between these 4 sectors, of the 60 million people who work in in manufacturing, both organized as well as unorganized, 62% are in these sectors. So these sectors specifically need packages. Point one. Point two, most of the employment which was mentioned, most of the employment in manufacturing is in unorganized sector. And unorganized sector is lacking not just in credit. It is, of course, lacking in credit, but it's lacking in many other things. The cluster development strategy that the Ministry of Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, MSME, has is so poorly funded and so poorly designed that the prospect of cluster development in the way that the Chinese used cluster development to develop both products for the export markets and for the domestic market is not going to succeed. We have to think of cluster development for modern sectors much more strategically, because it is in the unorganized sector that manufacturing employment has always grown. It's
Sure,
not
okay.
the regular employment which has in the organized sector, which has grown very much. Organized employment, for a variety of reasons, and manufacturing has increasingly become more and more capital intensive. So why are we even and with sort of technology changing, automation and robotics coming in, there is a whole series of sectors which are going to face even greater job losses.
Right.
So it's absolutely
Mr. Dua has
critical.
been waiting patiently. He's been wanting to come in on the debate more than a couple of times, but he's been waiting very patiently. So I'm going to let him have the floor now. Yes, Mr. Dua.
I think we are probably unduly emphasizing the potential of the manufacturing sector of India to create employment. We must accept the fact that we cannot possibly be creating employment with, 12 million people being added per month. The source of employment or job creation cannot be the manufacturing sector, particularly if we are emphasizing that we want to be a global exporting economy, copying the Chinese, Taiwanese, South Korean, Singaporean, etc. Certainly, you can have higher value of exports than what you have today, 1.6% of what was just mentioned. But please do not expect it also simultaneously to also create jobs in case you want to drive your economy on the basis of exports. There are competitiveness issues, etc. The world is not giving quotas to each country as it did earlier, that we'll import from you here and there. And in any case, we have to look at, there are countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Philippines, Indonesia, who also have this labor advantage which we talk about.
Right.
That was number 1 point. Second, let's not expect too much from coastal economic zones. The agenda itself talks about that we've had industrial estates in the beginning, we then turned them into economic zones, we then call them special economic zones. It also talks about national industrial zones. All these concepts were based on saying special facilities would be given in these areas, and labor was always pointed out, and labor flexibility will be extended.
Sure.
And the example of Gujarat has been given. So what is so special about coastal economic zones which has not been tried out earlier? China's example given, certainly China concentrated on those. China could acquire millions of square yards of land at one go. And for whatever reasons, they concentrated on making infrastructure there. We also thought the same when we said we'll promote special economic zones. What did we end up? We started promoting special economic zones all over the country.
Sure.
National economic zones all over the country.
There's one everywhere.
Everywhere. So the prioritization goes. So the Chinese example, and Chinese did all this, and at a time when they had the advantage of
So it's a
labor,
model that is difficult to follow, is what you're
Absolutely.
suggesting. Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Jindal, a lot of emphasis has been thrown on job creation. It is something that is very near and dear to you as well, and you've maintained several times on this program in the past that job creation should be the priority for the government and for anyone. Do you believe that that is being addressed correctly in this agenda?
Yes, it is being addressed. There is a lot of focus on that. And in fact, I have seen that it has focused on all those things. They have considered all tools which are available and should be used to realize this agenda. The way it has been formed, I couldn't find of anything which they have not used here. For example, how it will work. They have constituted separate parliamentary committee on planning, Then they have National Institutes for Transforming India. Then they have regional councils, etc. So it's a very formed mandate, enabling mandate, and it covers different aspects of the society, whatever was required to bring in, focus on them, deliberate on them, and work upon them. And employment, of course, and all these zones, these two zones we are talking about also, they will all give employment. Without employment, nothing will work. And I am quite hopeful that this is a realistic document, realistic program, and this should work very well because they have collected everything in one umbrella.
Sure.
And they are focusing on it.
Sure. Are the timelines realistic, Mr. Bhattacharya? And also, let's talk about the urbanization and the Shenzhen model. The Shenzhen model is something that has worked tremendously for the Chinese. 40 years ago, we didn't even know what Shenzhen was, but look at what it is today. Do you believe that that kind of a model can be used for our urban cities program?
Well, you know, I mean, we have to sort of accept the fact that the Chinese system and the Indian system, the Chinese polity and the Indian polity are two completely different commodities. So therefore, to believe that what works and what can be achieved in China can be replicated in India is actually living in a fool's paradise, if I may use that expression. So therefore, to say that what they achieve with urbanization, what Chinese achieved with infrastructure, what the Chinese achieved in terms of the coastal economic zones, to replicate them here will be a task. I mean, consider the fact that there are about 12 coastal zones already been proposed in this country.
Sure.
And they have not been able to be executed for the simple reason that land cannot be acquired under the current land rules and land laws. Now, this document talks about land leasing as a way out. But please remember that since this was land leasing was talked about by the current government 2.5 years ago, not a single state has yet been persuaded to introduce the idea of land leasing. So therefore, to believe that we will take the Chinese model and try to implement it and execute it in this country is actually not being very realistic. On the contrary, what we need to recognize is that there are policy constraints. We live in a democracy, and where you need to recognize that there are popular aspirations, there are inequalities, there are different kinds of people, there are different kinds of political parties in states and at the center. So therefore, taking all this into account, in my view, we have to recognize that we need to focus on areas of the economy which need to bring about, at least reduce the kind of economic disparities that this economy has been a victim of, which is, I think the focus is rightly given on agriculture, the overemployment in agriculture and underemployment in industry, where there is the productivity levels are so poor that where one job, a task can be performed by 5 people, we're actually using 10 people. So therefore, productivity gains in industry and technology is forcing that issue, and agriculture reforms, whether it is an APMC Act amendment, whether it is making sure that the minimum support price system is replaced with a more effective system, and whether the leakages in the crop insurance package which is introduced are addressed, I think this document does point to those various areas, and probably we should focus on those areas first.
Indeed.
Instead of trying to replicate the Chinese model of coastal economic zones.
You know, I've got 30 seconds left on the program. Professor Mehrotra, I know you've been wanting to come in on the debate as well. So many things to talk about, but we've got very little time today. So I'm going to let you have the last say on the program.
I will be as brief as possible. First of all, we add at this point of time only 4 to 5 million people to our labor force per annum. We don't add 12 million. We haven't done so for since 2004-5. Point 2, I endorse the points that Mr. Dua and Mr. Bhattacharya have made about special economic zones. We should not be too sanguine about them. Point 3, I think unfortunately, Mr. Dua is overemphasizing the role of services. We already have too many people in services. We have underemphasized manufacturing, so it's absolutely critical that we much more emphasize manufacturing. This country,
Sure.
since economic reforms, has not had an industrial policy. It got its first national manufacturing policy in
Divergent views
2011.
coming in on
Since
this
then, it has
debate,
not
but it's been a healthy debate, and it's a good thing at the end of the day, and it's a good thing to have divergent views as well. But unfortunately, we do not have any more time to continue on this debate. I'm going to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you, Ajay Dua, A.K. Bhattacharya, S.K. Jindal, and Santosh Kumar Mehrotra for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching. See you again next time.